Date: October 2nd, 2017. Location: Central City. 12-year-old Jamal Carter, a determined and hardworking black boy, lived with his parents in a modest rented apartment in Battery Park City, New York. Though the neighborhood was beautiful, with its towering skyscrapers and scenic views of the Hudson River, life for Jamal and his family was anything but easy. His father, Derek Carter, was a construction worker who spent long hours laboring on high-rise buildings, his hands calloused and bruised from years of hard work. His mother, Angela Carter, worked tirelessly at a local library, managing books, assisting visitors, and even handling janitorial duties when needed just to bring in extra money. Their family was built on struggle, every dollar carefully counted, every expense weighed against survival. Despite their best efforts, financial hardships were relentless. Rent for their apartment was high, and Angela juggled multiple shifts to keep up with bills while Derek took extra hours on site, often coming home too exhausted to eat. But everything changed one tragic afternoon when a construction accident left Derek with a severe hand injury. The doctor's verdict was devastating. He needed complete bed rest and could no longer work. With their primary source of income gone, the weight of survival fell entirely on Angela, who now had to stretch her meager paycheck to cover rent, groceries, and Jamal's private school tuition, a dream they had fought hard to provide for their son. Jamal, an intelligent and driven boy, loved school, excelling in his studies despite the struggles at home. But soon unpaid tuition caught up with them. One morning as Angela rushed to work, her phone buzzed with a message that shattered her spirit. Jamal had been expelled due to outstanding fees. Her heart sank. She had begged the school for more time, but rules were rules. That evening, when she returned home, exhausted and broken, she found Jamal waiting for her at the kitchen table, hopeful as ever. But before she could break the bad news, a sharp knock on the door interrupted them. It was their landlord, demanding rent. Desperate, Angela pleaded for an extension, promising to pay in 2 weeks. Reluctantly, the landlord agreed. But as she hugged Jamal that night, she knew deep down that 2 weeks wouldn't be enough to fix their troubles. The next morning, Angela made a difficult decision. She would find a job for Jamal. It pained her to make her son work, but they had no choice. That evening, when she returned from work, she sat Jamal down and told him she had found an opportunity for him, a cleaning job at a high-end bank in Battery Park City. To her relief, Jamal didn't hesitate. "I'll do it, Mom. I'll help," he said, determination lighting up his young face. As she pulled him into a tight hug, she felt both pride and sorrow. No child should have to work, but Jamal was different. He was strong, he was fearless, and he was ready to fight for his family. The following morning, as the first golden rays of sunlight poured through the small window of their apartment, Jamal Carter woke up to the sound of his mother shuffling around the kitchen. The aroma of eggs and toast filled the air, but Jamal knew there wasn't much to eat. His mother always made sure he had a meal, even if it meant going without one herself. Sitting at their wobbly dining table, Derek Carter, still wearing the exhaustion of pain on his face, attempted to button his shirt with one hand, but the injured one trembled uselessly in his lap. Jamal watched, frustration bubbling inside him. His father had always been strong, unbreakable, but now he was a man forced into helplessness. Angela placed a plate in front of them, her face lined with worry, but her voice steady. "Jamal, are you sure about this job? You're just a kid." "I'm sure, Mom," Jamal interrupted before she could change her mind. "I want to help." His words, spoken with the conviction of someone far beyond his years, made Angela's chest tighten. No mother wanted to see her child work instead of study, but what choice did they have? With a sigh, she nodded and kissed his forehead. "Just be careful, baby." Dressing in a cheap, oversized cleaning uniform, Jamal stared at his reflection in their small bathroom mirror. His deep brown eyes, once filled with boyish dreams, now held something different: responsibility. He wasn't going to school today like other kids his age. He was going to work. At 12 years old, he was no longer just a boy. He was stepping into a man's role. With his mother walking beside him, Jamal made his way through the bustling streets of Battery Park City, weaving between professionals in suits, tourists marveling at the skyline, and the ever-present sound of honking taxis. The towering glass and steel bank building stood like a fortress, its polished exterior reflecting the city's wealth and power, a world so different from his own. Angela held his hand tightly as they entered the building. "This is where you'll be working," she said softly, scanning the pristine lobby. Elegant chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and men in tailored suits and women in expensive heels walked with an air of importance. To them, people like Jamal and his mother were invisible, just workers who kept the place clean. A middle-aged man with graying hair, Mr. Reynolds, the bank's head janitor, approached them, his expression unreadable. "So, this is the boy?" he asked, eyeing Jamal critically. Angela nodded. "He's a hard worker," she said quickly, "and he needs this job." Reynolds exhaled loudly but nodded. "All right, kid. You'll mop the floors, clean the offices, and help out with whatever needs to be done. No slacking, no distractions." Jamal stood tall. "I understand, sir. I'll do my best." His mother's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she squeezed his shoulder. "I'll see you tonight, baby." Then, with one last reluctant glance, she turned and walked away. Jamal took a deep breath. This was it. His first job. His first step towards saving his family. The work was exhausting. He moved from room to room, pushing a mop across marble floors, emptying trash bins, and wiping down desks in the offices where wealthy bankers discussed million-dollar deals. He offered coffee to executives, picked up files that had been carelessly dropped, and even cleaned the CEO's private office, all while his own family struggled to pay rent. During his break, Jamal sat in the employee lounge, staring out the window at the world outside. Kids his age were playing in the park, going to school, living childhoods free of worries. But not him. He was working, he was fighting, and he wouldn't stop. Not until his family was safe. As the evening sun dipped below the city skyline, Jamal finished his shift, exhausted but proud. When he got home, his parents were waiting for him, his mother with tired eyes, his father with a proud nod. "You did good, son," Derek said softly. Jamal smiled. For the first time in weeks, he felt like things might just be okay. But none of them knew that in just a few days, everything would change forever. Wait. If you support racism, comment 55. If you stand against it, comment 77. If you faced racism, let us know and share your story with us at our email in the channel description. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. For the next several days, Jamal Carter settled into his new routine, waking up before dawn, putting on his oversized janitor's uniform, and making his way to the bank where billionaires and businessmen handled fortunes he could only dream of. While most 12-year-olds were worrying about homework and basketball games, Jamal was scrubbing floors, refilling coffee stations, and ensuring that the polished world of finance stayed spotless. Every dollar he earned felt like a small victory, a step toward keeping his family afloat, a way to prove to his parents that he could share the weight of their struggles. Though the work was grueling, he refused to complain. He cleaned toilets while men in expensive suits walked past him without a glance, emptied trash bins filled with discarded reports worth more than his entire week's salary, and watched as bank executives sipped gourmet coffee while his mother worked double shifts just to afford groceries. But Jamal never resented them. If anything, it fueled him. He promised himself that one day he wouldn't just clean a bank, he'd own one. Every night when he came home, his parents were waiting. His father, Derek, trying to hide the pain of his injured hand behind a forced smile, and his mother, Angela, exhausted but always ready to pull him into a hug, whispering how proud she was of him. But even though Jamal's hard work had bought them a few more days of stability, the walls were still closing in. Bills kept piling up. The landlord's deadline for rent was looming, and no amount of overtime could change the fact that their financial situation was a ticking time bomb. And then the worst blow came. One night, as they sat around their tiny kitchen table eating a simple meal of rice and beans, Angela hesitated before speaking. "Jamal, baby, I don't want to tell you this, but the bank only needs temporary workers. Your job might not last much longer." Jamal's stomach twisted. He had fought so hard to prove he could help, and now even this small victory was slipping away. His father clenched his jaw, guilt shadowing his tired face. I should be the one working, not my son, Derek muttered, his injured hand resting uselessly on the table. Jamal shook his head, his determination solidifying. If the job was temporary, he would work harder. If the money wasn't enough, he would find another way. Failure wasn't an option. He didn't sleep much that night, his mind racing with plans, possibilities, and fears. The next morning, as he walked into the Grand Bank lobby, he felt a strange unease, a whisper of something wrong in the air, a tension he couldn't quite place. He pushed the feeling aside and got to work, his hands moving automatically as he wiped down counters and straightened chairs. The hours passed in a blur of routine, but just as the afternoon crowd filled the bank, executives returning from lunch, security guards standing at their posts, tellers handling stacks of cash, everything changed. A deafening boom echoed through the building as the front doors slammed open, followed by the sharp crack of a gunshot. Screams erupted. Panic exploded. Hands shot into the air. And then came the words that would forever alter Jamal's life. "Hands up! Nobody move! This is a robbery!" Jamal's breath caught in his throat as he froze mid-step, gripping the mop handle like a lifeline. His heart pounded so hard he thought it would burst from his chest. Men in black masks flooded into the bank, their weapons raised, their voices barking orders with deadly authority. He watched in horror as security guards were forced to the ground, bank employees sobbed in terror, and high-ranking executives, people who once looked untouchable, now trembled like powerless children. Among them, standing firm despite the chaos, was Detective Olivia Reynolds, the young and fearless NYPD police chief, dressed in her navy blue uniform, her blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail. She had arrived with her elite police team moments before the robbers, likely tipped off about suspicious activity. But it was too late. They had been overpowered, disarmed, and forced to their knees alongside the civilians. The robbers moved with terrifying precision, tying up the police officers with thick ropes, shoving hostages to the ground, and shouting threats that sent chills through Jamal's spine. He knew he should run, hide, do something, but where? How? His body refused to move. He wasn't a fighter, wasn't a cop. He was just a 12-year-old black boy who was supposed to be mopping the floors, not standing in the middle of a nightmare. Then through the chaos, he saw something that made his blood turn to ice. One of the masked men gripping Detective Reynolds by her collar, yanking her roughly to her feet, and slamming her against a marble pillar. "You think you can stop us, sweetheart?" the robber sneered, pressing his gun under her chin. "Let's see how tough you are without your badge and gun." Olivia's piercing blue eyes held defiance. But even she wasn't invincible. She was trapped, outnumbered, just like the rest of them. And that was when something shifted inside Jamal. The fear that had frozen him melted into something else. Rage, determination, something primal and fierce. He was no longer just a scared kid. He was the only one free, the only one who could do something. Swallowing hard, he dropped his mop and slowly backed away, slipping into the shadows behind the teller's counter, his heart hammering in his chest. He had no weapon, no plan, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let these men win. Jamal's breath came in quick, shallow gasps as he pressed himself into the narrow space behind the teller's counter, his small body wedged between a filing cabinet and the cold marble wall. His heart pounded so loudly he feared it would give him away, but he forced himself to stay still, to listen, to think. The robbers had taken control. Kid, 12 years old, a janitor, a boy who should have been in school instead of trapped inside a bank with armed criminals. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that these men were up to something much bigger than just a robbery, and if someone didn't act fast, people were going to die. He took another careful glance at the scene unfolding before him. The hostages, nearly 30 in total, huddled on the floor in small groups, their faces twisted in fear. The security guards, disarmed and beaten, forced to lie still under the threat of death. The police officers, including Detective Olivia Reynolds, their hands tightly bound behind their backs, stripped of their weapons and badges, unable to fight back. And then there were the robbers themselves, 7 men, all heavily armed, dressed in black tactical gear that made them look like a military unit. But despite their outward calm, Jamal could see the tension in their movements, the way they kept checking the clock, shifting their positions, whispering to each other. They weren't just waiting to steal money, they were waiting for something or someone. The sirens outside were growing louder now, echoing through the thick bank walls like the distant rumble of a coming storm. Through the glass windows, Jamal could make out the flashing red and blue lights of approaching NYPD and FBI units. Armored trucks rolling onto the street, officers in full riot gear taking positions. The outside world had taken notice, but something about that realization sent a chill down Jamal's spine. The robbers weren't panicking. Instead of rushing to grab what cash they could and running, they seemed prepared. Almost like they wanted the police here. Almost like this was part of the plan. Jamal clenched his fists, the weight of that thought pressing down on him like an avalanche. This wasn't just a robbery, this was a setup. But for what? Were they planning to take hostages? Were they after something specific inside the bank? He had no answers. Only the growing certainty that whatever was about to happen, it was going to be bad. And then, suddenly, the leader of the gang, a tall, broad-shouldered man with piercing gray eyes visible through his mask, raised a hand, signaling to the others. "Move to phase 2, he said, his voice calm, authoritative. Immediately, two of the robbers grabbed one of the tellers, a young woman in her early 20s, and dragged her to the center of the room. "No!" she screamed, kicking and struggling, but it was useless. One of the masked men pressed a gun to her temple, forcing her to her knees. A chilling silence fell over the bank. Jamal's stomach twisted into knots. He knew what was coming before it even happened. The leader turned toward the hostages, his cold gray eyes scanning the room before finally locking onto the row of bound police. "Wait, if you support racism, comment 55. If you stand against it, comment 77. If you faced racism, let us know and share your story with us at our email in the channel description. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel." "Officers," he walked slowly toward Detective Olivia Reynolds, the woman who had been fearless even in the face of danger, and yanked her up by her arm. Her blue eyes burned with fury, but she said nothing as he shoved her forward. "You cops think you run this city," he said, circling her like a vulture. "But right now, we run this bank." He tilted his head toward the trembling young teller. "See, we have rules. If the police try anything, people die. If we don't get what we want, people die." He turned his gaze back to Olivia. "So here's what's going to happen, Officer Reynolds. You're going to get on that radio and you're going to tell your friends outside to stand down. Tell them that if anyone tries to breach this building, the first bullet goes into her head, then the next into yours." Olivia's jaw clenched. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice steady despite the gun pointed at her face. The leader chuckled. "No, sweetheart. The mistake would be testing how serious I am." His finger tightened on the trigger. Jamal's heart stopped. He could barely breathe, his hands shaking as he gripped the counter's edge, so hard his knuckles turned white. He had to do something. He couldn't just stand there and watch someone die. But what could he do? He was unarmed, outnumbered, just a kid against trained killers. And yet, they didn't know he was here. That was his one advantage, his only weapon. His eyes darted around desperately, searching for anything he could use, anything that could give him a chance. And then, he saw it, a loose marble paperweight sitting on one of the bank manager's desks, just a few feet away. It wasn't much, but it was heavy, solid, enough to do damage if used right. He swallowed hard, steeling himself. If he messed up, if they saw him, he'd be dead before he could blink. But if he did nothing, people would die anyway. He had no choice. It was now or never. Moving with the careful precision of someone whose life depended on it, Jamal slid from his hiding spot, creeping along the counter's edge. Every step felt like an eternity, every breath a deafening roar in his ears. The robbers were still focused on Olivia and the terrified bank teller, their backs turned to him. This was his chance. Reaching the desk, his fingers closed around the paperweight, its cool, smooth surface grounding him in the moment. He tightened his grip, his mind racing through every possible outcome. He had to hit the right target, the one closest to Olivia, the one with the gun to the teller's head. One shot, one chance. He took a deep breath, steadied his arm, and then, with every ounce of strength in his small body, he hurled the marble weight across the room. It slammed into the gunman's temple with a sickening crack, the force knocking him sideways as his finger jerked on the trigger. But the shot went wide, missing the teller by inches. The gunman collapsed to the floor, unconscious before he even knew what hit him. For a split second, there was nothing but stunned silence. And then, chaos exploded. "What the hell?" one of the robbers shouted, spinning toward where Jamal had been standing. But Jamal was already moving, diving behind a pillar before they could see him. Olivia didn't waste a second. With the distraction Jamal had given her, she swung her bound hands up, smashing them into the leader's jaw with enough force to make him stumble back. The other officers, seeing their chance, began struggling against their restraints. The room erupted in screams, the robbers shouting orders at each other, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. Jamal's heart pounded as he crouched behind the pillar, his lungs burning with adrenaline. He had done it. He had taken the first shot, but this fight was far from over. And now they knew someone was working against them, and they would be coming for him next. Jamal pressed his back against the cold marble pillar, his breath coming in sharp gasps as the deafening sounds of chaos filled the bank. He had done it. He had thrown the first blow, knocked out one of the gunmen, and given the hostages a glimmer of hope. But now they knew. The leader of the gang, the cold, gray-eyed man with the terrifying calmness, had snapped his head toward the direction of the attack, his body going rigid with fury. "Find him," he growled, his voice quiet but dripping with lethal intent. The other masked men immediately spread out, their boots thudding heavily against the pristine marble floors as they searched for the unseen threat. Jamal had gone from being just another hostage to the most wanted person in the room. His fingers clenched against the pillar's smooth surface, his pulse hammering as he calculated his next move. He couldn't stay here. They were closing in, their eyes scanning every inch of the bank, their guns raised, ready to fire at the slightest movement. He was unarmed, outnumbered, and barely taller than the chairs in the waiting area. But he still had the one thing they didn't, the element of surprise. They had expected a routine bank robbery, not a 12-year-old kid smart enough to fight back. His heart pounded as he peered around the edge of the pillar, watching as two of the gunmen split up, one heading toward the row of teller counters, the other sweeping through the office cubicles. The leader stood in the middle of the room, his gloved hands tightening into fists, his fury barely contained. "This isn't a game, kid," he called out, his voice echoing through the grand lobby. "You just signed your own death sentence." Jamal swallowed hard. He knew what that meant. They wouldn't just shoot him if they caught him. They'd make an example out of him. His eyes darted across the room, searching for anything that could give him an advantage. And then he spotted it. A janitor's supply closet, half open near the back hallway. If he could get there, he might be able to find something useful. Cleaning chemicals, spray bottles, maybe even a mop handle he could use as a weapon. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Gritting his teeth, he crouched low and moved swiftly, keeping to the shadows, using overturned chairs and desks as cover. The adrenaline rushing through his veins made everything sharper. The muffled sobs of hostages, the clicking of boots against marble, the tense, controlled breathing of the men hunting him down. He slipped behind a row of filing cabinets just as one of the robbers passed by, his assault rifle raised, his eyes scanning every corner. Too close. Jamal held his breath, pressing himself into the shadows as the gunman lingered, his fingers tightening around his weapon. For a moment it felt like time had stopped. One wrong move, one wrong breath. That was all it would take. And then, a loud crash from across the room. One of the panicked hostages had accidentally knocked over a metal tray from the break room counter. The sound was deafening in the tense silence, and the gunman's head snapped toward the noise. "Over there!" he barked, turning away from Jamal and rushing toward the sound. A distraction. It wasn't intentional, but it was exactly what Jamal needed. He moved. Staying low, he sprinted toward the closet, slipping inside and shutting the door just as another robber turned toward him. Darkness. Silence. The smell of cleaning chemicals filled his nose as he leaned against the door, trying to steady his racing heart. He had made it. For now. His hands fumbled in the dark, searching the shelves, grabbing anything that could be used as a weapon. A metal mop handle, solid, long enough to be useful. Good. A can of industrial-strength cleaning spray, the kind that could burn if it got in someone's eyes, even better. His fingers closed around a small fire extinguisher tucked in the corner. It was heavy, awkward to carry, but if he could use it as a weapon, it could buy him time. He wasn't strong enough to fight these men head-on, but he didn't have to be. He just needed to be smarter. His mind raced, forming a plan as the sounds of the robbers searching for him grew louder. He could hear their frustration, the leader's voice sharp with anger. "I want that kid found, now!" Jamal swallowed hard. If they wanted to find him, he'd make sure they regretted it. Tightening his grip on the mop handle, he took a deep breath, opened the door a fraction of an inch, then slipped out, vanishing into the shadows once again. The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. Jamal moved through the darkened edges of the bank like a shadow, his small frame slipping between overturned desks and glass partitions, his mind sharp and focused despite the overwhelming fear gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. He had no room for mistakes. The robbers had been in control from the moment they stormed into the bank, but that was about to change. He gripped the mop handle tightly in one hand and the can of industrial-strength cleaning spray in the other, his knuckles white from the force of his hold. He wasn't strong enough to take them head-on, but strength wasn't the only weapon in a fight. Speed, stealth, and surprise. Those were his advantages, and he was about to use them all. From his hiding spot near the back of the room, he watched as the gray-eyed leader paced in frustration, his patience wearing thin. "You're testing my limits, kid," the man called out, his voice low but filled with venom. "You think you're smart, but let me tell you something. You're trapped. There's nowhere to run." Jamal ignored the words, his mind calculating every movement in the room. 3 robbers were actively searching for him, their weapons raised, their boots thudding against the polished floor as they kicked over furniture, checked behind counters, and scanned every dark corner. The other 3 were keeping the hostages in check, their fingers twitching over the triggers of their rifles, their gazes flicking nervously between their leader and the situation unraveling before them. They were losing control. The power they had at the beginning was slipping away, and Jamal was the reason why. He had to keep pushing. He had to make them feel like they weren't the hunters anymore. He had to make them feel like the prey. He spotted his first target, a robber standing just a few feet away from the supply closet, his back turned, focused on checking behind an empty teller's desk. Now was his chance. Silent, quick, precise. He moved like lightning, darting forward and raising the can of cleaning spray just as the man turned. One quick, violent press of the nozzle, and a jet of burning chemicals shot straight into the gunman's eyes. A choked scream tore from the man's throat as he stumbled back, his hands flying up to his face, the rifle slipping from his grip as he staggered blindly. Jamal didn't hesitate. He swung the mop handle with everything he had, the thick wooden pole cracking against the man's knee with a sickening thud. The robber crumpled to the ground, writhing in pain, his screams muffled as Jamal immediately grabbed the fallen rifle. Heavy, cold, deadly. His fingers trembled as he held the weapon, his breath sharp and ragged. He had never held a gun before, never even touched one. His mother had always warned him about guns, about how dangerous they were, how they could destroy lives. But right now in this moment, it wasn't a weapon. It was a lifeline. He didn't have to fire it. He just had to use it to his advantage. Taking a deep breath, he dragged the fallen robber behind a counter, kicking the gun away before quickly retreating into the shadows. 1 down, 6 left. His heart pounded as he pressed himself into the corner, his mind racing. He could hear the others reacting. "What the hell was that?" one of the robbers shouted, turning toward the noise. The leader's voice cut through the confusion. "He's still here, and now he's armed." There was a pause, then a slow, dangerous chuckle. "You're making this fun, kid, but that was a mistake." Jamal clenched his jaw. Number. The mistake was theirs, because now he knew something they didn't. They were afraid, maybe not of him, not yet, but of the unknown, of losing control, and that was enough. He took another deep breath and moved again, vanishing deeper into the bank. becoming the ghost they couldn't catch. The fight wasn't over. It was just getting started. Jamal's heartbeat pounded like a war drum, his breath slow and controlled as he pressed himself against the side of a marble column, gripping the stolen rifle with trembling fingers. He wasn't a killer. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a 12-year-old boy who had been pushed into a fight he never asked for. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that he had them scared. He could hear it in their voices, in the way their footsteps no longer carried the same confidence, in the slight hesitation before they turned each corner. He had turned the game against them. The hunter was now the hunted. From his position, he carefully peeked around the pillar, scanning the room. The robber he had taken down was still unconscious behind the counter. The leader, the man with the piercing gray eyes, stood near the hostages, his jaw tight with frustration, his gloved fingers curling into fists as he processed the situation, spiraling out of control. Two of the other robbers were pacing near the front of the bank, rifles raised, but their movements were wrong now, tense, uncertain. The remaining three were spread out, searching, eyes darting between shadows. They had all the power when this started. Now they had doubt, and Jamal knew that doubt could kill them. He took a steadying breath, adjusting his grip on the rifle. He didn't want to use it. It was heavy in his hands, the weight of it pressing down on him like a lead chain. But he didn't need to shoot. He just needed to keep breaking them apart. His eyes flicked toward the back of the bank, where a small emergency exit sign flickered dimly above a metal security door. The cops were outside. He needed to get a message to them. But how? The robbers had destroyed the hostages' phones. The landlines had been cut, and he couldn't just run outside. If they saw him, they'd gun him down before he made it 3 steps. He clenched his jaw. Think, think, think. His eyes darted toward the fallen robber he had knocked out earlier. The radio. Every one of these men had earpieces. They had to be communicating with each other. If he could get to that earpiece, maybe he could hear what they were planning. Or better yet, maybe he could use it against them. He sucked in a deep breath and began moving again, his body staying low, weaving through the maze of desks and toppled chairs like a shadow. He wasn't strong enough to fight them directly, but he could be faster, smarter. He could be the ghost that kept haunting them. As he reached the unconscious robber's body, he moved quickly, his small hands yanking the black earpiece free from the man's ear. His pulse raced as he pressed it against his own. Static crackled in his ear for a moment before a voice came through, sharp, agitated. Should have been simple. The cops are moving in outside. What's the ETA on the breach? Jamal's stomach twisted. Breach? He didn't have time to think about what that meant before another voice cut in, the leader's voice. Cold, controlled, dangerous. They think we're just common thieves, the man said, his tone laced with amusement. Let them keep thinking that. A short pause, then the words that made Jamal's blood run ice cold. Tell the second team to get ready. Second team? There were more of them. He felt his chest tighten. This wasn't just about the money. This wasn't even just a hostage situation. There was something bigger happening here, and the police outside didn't know. He had to warn them. Somehow. Swallowing the fear rising in his throat, Jamal gripped the earpiece tighter, his mind working faster than it ever had before. He didn't have weapons, he didn't have training, but he had information. And right now, that made him the most dangerous person in the room. He just had to survive long enough to use it. Wait! If you support racism, comment 55. If you stand against it, comment 77. If you've faced racism, let us know and share your story with us at our email in the channel description. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Jamal's grip tightened around the stolen earpiece, his pulse hammering against his ribs as he crouched behind an overturned desk, his young mind racing to process what he had just heard. A second team. This wasn't just a robbery. This wasn't just about money. Whatever these men were planning, it was bigger, something the police outside had no idea about. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the earpiece, pressing it deeper against his ear, forcing himself to listen. The leader's voice crackled through the static again, calm, calculated, dripping with quiet menace. Stay in position. We move when the second team breaches. A new voice, one Jamal hadn't heard before, cut in. We're in the tunnels now. 5 minutes to breach. Jamal felt his stomach drop. Tunnels? What tunnels? His mind flashed back to something his father had once told him about the city. How New York's foundations were riddled with underground service tunnels, abandoned subway lines, hidden pathways beneath old buildings. The bank must have been connected to one. That was their real plan. They weren't just stealing money from the vault. They were planning something worse. His brain worked furiously, piecing it together. The team inside the bank was just a distraction. The police, the SWAT teams, the FBI, they were all focused on what was happening in the lobby. But the real threat was coming from below. The second team was using the tunnels to infiltrate the bank from underneath. But why? What was down there? He thought of the vault, the thick steel doors, the rows of safety deposit boxes filled with wealth and secrets belonging to the city's elite. Were they after something specific? Documents? Blackmail material? Or was it something even worse? He didn't know, but he knew one thing for certain. If he didn't do something, the police outside wouldn't realize what was happening until it was too late. He had to warn them. Now his eyes flicked toward the hostages. Detective Olivia Reynolds was still kneeling with the other officers, her sharp blue eyes scanning the room, watching, waiting. Jamal knew she was biding her time, waiting for an opening to fight back. If he could just reach her, tell her what he knew, she could get the message to the police outside. But how? The moment he stepped out into the open, the gunmen would see him, and this time, they wouldn't hesitate. He bit his lip, his thoughts racing. He needed a distraction, something big enough to pull their attention away, even if only for a few seconds. His gaze darted back to the unconscious robber he had taken down earlier, to the fire extinguisher he had hidden nearby. An idea sparked. It was risky, but it was the only chance he had. Swallowing his fear, Jamal tightened his grip on the stolen rifle, grabbed the extinguisher, and took one last deep breath. He was about to go all in, and there was no turning back. Jamal knew he had only one shot, one chance to turn the tide before it was too late. His small hands gripped the fire extinguisher tightly, his heart a drumbeat of panic and determination as he adjusted the earpiece one last time, listening to the robber's communications. 4 minutes until the second team breached from the tunnels. He didn't have 4 minutes. He barely had one. His mind raced through his plan: create chaos, distract the gunman, get to Detective Olivia Reynolds, and warn her before the second team arrived. Failure meant people would die. Failure wasn't an option. Taking a deep breath, he lunged from his hiding spot, lifting the fire extinguisher with both hands and squeezing the handle. A powerful burst of thick, white fog exploded into the air, blinding everything in its path. The sound was deafening, a high-pressure hiss that sent the robbers spinning in confusion. "What the?" one of them shouted, their rifles jerking up. Jamal didn't stop. He threw the extinguisher as hard as he could. The heavy metal cylinder slammed into one of the gunman's ribs with a sickening crunch, sending him crashing to the ground with a scream. 2 down, 5 left. But Jamal wasn't done. Before the fog cleared, he sprinted across the open space, dodging between desks, his small size making him nearly impossible to track in the chaos. The hostages gasped as he suddenly appeared among them, dropping to his knees beside Detective Olivia Reynolds. Her eyes widened in shock as she recognized him, the janitor boy, the kid. "Listen," he whispered fiercely, his hands working quickly to untie the ropes around her wrists. "They have a second team coming from the tunnels. They're going to hit the vault. The police don't know." Olivia's sharp blue eyes flashed with understanding, her cop instincts kicking in immediately. As soon as her hands were free, she reached for the stolen rifle Jamal had dragged with him. "You did good, kid," she murmured, gripping the weapon like it was a part of her. "Now stay down." But Jamal didn't stay down. He wasn't done yet. One of the robbers, the leader, the gray-eyed man, was already emerging from the fog, his gun sweeping the room. "There!" he bellowed, locking onto Jamal and Olivia. A shot rang out. Jamal flinched, expecting pain, but it never came. Instead, Olivia moved like lightning, pivoting onto one knee and firing the stolen rifle with deadly precision. The bullet slammed into the leader's shoulder, sending him stumbling back with a curse. The hostages screamed as the gunfire shattered the tense silence. The balance had shifted. Chaos exploded in full force. Olivia lunged forward, using her freed hands to yank the gun from the nearest robber's grip before flipping him onto his back with brutal efficiency. At the same time, the other tied-up officers, seeing their moment, launched themselves at the remaining gunmen, fists and elbows flying. A full-blown fight erupted in the middle of the bank, fists and gunfire clashing as the NYPD officers fought like cornered wolves, using everything they had to bring the robbers down. Jamal knew he should run, should get to safety, should stay out of the way. But then he saw it. The leader, his face twisted in fury, reaching for his weapon. Olivia was still engaged in a brutal fight with another robber. She didn't see him, but Jamal did, and he didn't think. He moved. With all the strength in his 12-year-old body, he grabbed a broken chair leg from the floor and sprinted toward the leader, gripping it like a baseball bat. The man turned, his gray eyes widening in disbelief as he caught sight of the kid charging him. Too late. Jamal swung the wooden leg with everything he had, aiming straight for the injured shoulder. Crack! The leader roared in pain, his gun slipping from his fingers. Before he could recover, Olivia was there. Her rifle pressed against his chest. "Game over," she snarled, and with a swift kick, she sent him sprawling onto the marble floor. Outside, the sound of sirens grew deafening. The cavalry had arrived. Tactical teams stormed the bank, breaching through the main doors in a wave of blue and black. Guns raised, voices barking orders. Within seconds, the remaining robbers were overwhelmed, tackled to the ground and cuffed before they could even think of resisting. The hostages sobbed in relief, the nightmare finally over. Olivia, breathing heavily, turned to Jamal, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, a slow, proud smile. "You saved every single one of us," she said, gripping his shoulder. "You're a damn hero, Jamal Carter." And just like that, everything changed. The media erupted with the story of the 12-year-old black boy who had outsmarted an entire gang of criminals. Reporters crowded outside his home, news stations calling him the hero of Battery Park City. The mayor himself visited, offering his family a new home, financial security, and most importantly, a full scholarship for Jamal's future. The government stepped in to cover his father's medical bills, ensuring Derek Carter could finally recover without worrying about money. His mother, Angela, was offered a better job, one that didn't require endless, exhausting shifts. And Jamal, he never had to work again. But even after all the praise, all the awards, all the attention, he remained the same kid. A boy who had simply refused to give up. A boy who had fought when no one else could. A boy who had saved lives, not because he wanted fame, but because it was the right thing to do. And as he stood on the steps of City Hall, cameras flashing, microphones shoved in his face, reporters asking what he wanted to do next, he only had one answer. "I'm going to finish school," Jamal said firmly. "Then I'm going to help people like me, people who don't get chances." The world listened, and for the first time in his life, Jamal Carter knew that he wasn't just another kid from a struggling family. He was something more. He was unstoppable. He was a hero, and this was only the beginning. In a world where heroes are often seen as larger-than-life figures, draped in capes, armed with weapons, or backed by power, Jamal Carter proved that true heroism is born from something much deeper: courage, resilience, and the refusal to accept defeat. A 12-year-old black boy raised in struggle, forced into responsibility beyond his years, found himself trapped in a moment where most would surrender to fear. But instead of running, instead of hiding, he fought back. With nothing but his wit, his quick thinking, and the sheer will to protect innocent lives, he stood against trained criminals, heavily armed and ruthless, who had taken over a high-security bank, outnumbered and overpowering even the NYPD officers meant to stop them. He didn't have a badge, he didn't have a gun, he didn't have years of training, yet he did what no one else could. He turned fear into action, chaos into opportunity, and his own smallness into the biggest advantage of all. In doing so, he saved dozens of lives, exposed a deeper criminal conspiracy, and became the unexpected hero that a city never knew it needed. But this story is more than just a thrilling moment of bravery. It's a wake-up call. How many Jamal Carters exist today? How many kids are growing up in hardship, in broken systems, in environments that expect them to fail, yet hold within them the potential to be extraordinary? How many young black boys, just like Jamal, are waiting for someone to believe in them, to give them the opportunities they deserve? We cannot let this story end here. It is our responsibility, as a community, as a society, as human beings, to ensure that young heroes like Jamal don't just survive, but thrive. We must invest in their futures, support programs that uplift kids from underprivileged backgrounds, donate to scholarships, push for better education, and create opportunities that allow them to break free from the cycle of struggle. Jamal Carter's courage changed lives. But what if we could change his? What if we could make sure his family never has to face eviction again? What if we could ensure his education is secured so he never has to choose between survival and school? What if we could create a world where young black boys don't have to become heroes just to make it out alive? Share this story. Talk about it. Support the initiatives that give kids like Jamal a real future. Advocate for education reform, police accountability, and community programs that nurture young black excellence instead of ignoring it. This is the moment to act. This is the moment to change lives, because Jamal Carter didn't just prove that heroes can come from anywhere. He proved that they already exist, waiting to be recognized, waiting to be empowered. But they can't do it alone. Will you be the one to stand with them? Will you be the one to fight for the next Jamal Carter? Because the next hero is out there, right now, just waiting for their chance to rise. Be a part of that change. Be the reason that hero gets their moment. Sure to like this video, subscribe for more real stories, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps keep the fight for justice alive.